That's right, folks. We're talking twisters today. And as you can see, they're going round and round, just like a record. Problem is, you don't want to be caught in one of these. So, as always, what we're talking about is trying to learn about bigger concepts, and ultimately, we're trying to see what's our perception of these huge events that happen on Earth, twisters being one of them. Speaking of perceptions, let me tempt you with a subliminal message. As the picture says, the Tour de France happens to be a sporting event in France. It happens every July. Based on what you see here, can you figure out what that actual sporting event is? See if you can figure that out. It's obviously the message within it. So our message today, though, is the destructive patterns of tornadoes. And as you can see, we're going to have two things to accomplish: a screencast that will help you fill out a Google slide, and then there is a video on YouTube that I've added that will also help you complete this tornado form, which will be a grade. So let's head right into it. What I'd like you to think about is try and describe what a tornado is. Can you think about what exactly a tornado is all about? How could you describe what it looks like, how it moves, what its effects are? I mean, we recognize that we have this twirling, whirling dervish of stuff just twirling around. Well, what exactly is it? Well, essentially, the definition is it's going to be a spinning column of air. Yes, we certainly recognize that. But the three things that it has, obviously high winds, I want you to know that there's a low pressure air in the middle of it. So that's real important because the temperature is going to be very important. Low pressure, very warm in the middle. However, on the outside, it's very cold. So that is essentially what's causing the spinning. And obviously, it is a column of air that is connected to the ground. So these are the three descriptors that you need to add to your notes. So speaking of your notes, here's the assignment. If you open up this Google slide, what you should be filling out is this Google slide. So ultimately, what are the three things? I expect you to be able to identify those things. Now, in terms of moving forward, what we want to figure out is, how does a tornado form? Well, there's specific steps on how this whirling dervish of air is created. So step one, you need warm, humid air to collide with cool air. Now, we recognize that occurs, and we recognize when this happens, usually this is creating wind. Well, in this case, it's also going to create a thunderstorm. That's going to be important because this thunderstorm will then create energy. Usually this is just creating just regular wind, but if we're creating this drastic situation where these two air masses crash into each other and a thunderstorm is accompanying it, you can expect a lot of energy. If that's the case, step two. Step two, you have a change in wind direction and increasing in speed causes the wind and the air to start to swirl. If it swirls enough, it's going to cause step three. And this is the key. Step three is when the warm air, that spinning air, that swirling air, is gathering up warm temperatures from the ground, causing what's called as an updraft. So all of this warm air is getting sucked in to this swirling air, and it's creating more and more energy right in the middle. Now there's colder air on the outside. Remember, we had this cooler, dry air on the outside. What that does, the rising air flips into a horizontal pattern. So you can see horizontally, it's flipping not just up, but then it flattens out, going across. So it creates this cross pattern. So it tips the air over realistically. So folks, add this information to your document. And then finally, step 4. The updraft swirls into a funnel. So you get all of this funneling and it creates more and more energy, and ultimately it starts to then grow and stretch towards the ground. When that funnel, or better known as a vortex, when it touches the ground, therefore it is now considered a tornado. So keep that in mind. Now, where do these typical huge events occur? Let me mention. Let's think about this for a second, folks. Where in the United States do most tornadoes occur? Try and figure out what specific states. Let's see if you can come up with it. Correct answer, folks. Something called Tornado Alley. Tornado Alley is right through the Midwest, all of this flat area. So you could consider these states all part of what's considered as Tornado Alley. So if you came up with Texas or Nebraska or Colorado or Kansas, you're in the ballpark. Nice job. Now, how does this occur, or why does Tornado Alley, why is it in this specific spot? Oh, a little ahead of ourselves, folks. The fact is, you're going to get a situation where, as I mentioned, this low air pressure, this warm, moist air, is being sucked into, from the south, into the Midwest of the United States. We could say it's the prevailing westerlies pulling in this air. This will be the dry air, but you need to have some moist, warm air. So that falls into place. And now here comes the cold, dry air down from the jet stream. So in this pocket of the United States, you have this collision. So the conditions are ripe for whenever this cold and warm air collide, along with the fact that, as I mentioned here, warm, moist air, cold, dry air, it's also very flat. The flat land makes it just perfect for a tornado to form whenever these two situations are colliding. So these are 3 conditions that make Tornado Alley Tornado Alley. Now, my question, do you actually think tornadoes affect Berks County? You would think, well, we live in a situation where it's very hilly. We're at the base of the Appalachian Mountains. So you would think Pennsylvania, you never hear about tornadoes. Well, believe it or not, let's talk about our little county specifically. Here we are, Schuylkill Valley District. Here's our schools. Beautiful Lake Onalawney right here. And as you can see, what I'm going to mention is everyone that I'm probably talking to, you guys all live over here somewhere. Okay, the Reading Airport right here, Centerport, Dauberville, all these places where you guys are living. Of course, Leesport. What I want to point out, good old Kutztown University here. We're probably familiar with it. So if you've ever traveled from your homes up 222 towards Kutztown University, you might come across this area. Maybe you have, maybe you haven't. What I want to point out is that area is very flat. So this little section, so we're talking about 10 miles away from us, this has this section of Lyons, Bowers, all the way stretching over to 222. This area has been known to be flattened by tornadoes. A few years ago, probably talking talking maybe 15 years ago, a real bad tornado came through, crushed lions. I remember seeing the damage of it. So periodically, whenever there's these huge storms that you typically see, maybe with some hailstorms we sometimes get, Lyons, the area of Lyons, a little bit south of Kutztown University, a real tough spot that has gotten some drastic weather patterns, namely tornadoes. So believe it or not, folks, it affects us. Now, a couple characteristics of tornadoes that I'd like to share. The shape, many different shapes. They're usually narrow in terms of their funnel. So you can see typically cylinder shaped. However, sometimes they are rather wide, more like a wedge here. So they definitely have different types of shapes. This is typical, this rope one, typical of like a tornado that might form over water also. So keep that in mind. So a lot of different shapes they come in. Another piece of information, the size of tornadoes, they can be just a few feet or relatively small, or they can be quite large, quite wide, about 2 miles wide. So typically they're about 500 feet across. So there's a lot of different types of tornado sizes. Love the dust devil, so kind of interesting. Another little interesting fact: color. Obviously, many different colors. Typically, we look at them as either invisible or the grayish or white. But depending upon what kind of material they're picking up, what type of land they're forming over, they're going to have plenty of different colors: black, blue, reddish, brownish. So a lot of different colors tornadoes can come in. Rotation. What I want to point out: rotation for us in the northern hemisphere, they rotate counterclockwise. In the southern hemisphere, it will be clockwise. So folks, this is all information that you need to be getting down in your notes in the Google Slides, so make sure you recognize that. A couple other basic little facts here. Wind speed. Typically, the slowest wind speed is 65 miles, but they can get up to 250. What I do want to point out is there's so many of them that form over the United States, about at least over 100 per year. In all of the world, the United States has the most tornadoes. Now, in terms of wind speed, very important to recognize the wind speed obviously is going to determine which scale for tornadoes. So between 65 and 85, you're going to see some light damage. And as you can see here, the damage obviously is going to go higher and higher. You get up to over 200 miles per hour in terms of a tornado, you're losing everything. The homes are just going to just totally be wiped away. So keep in mind how the damage obviously is getting worse and worse as the speed obviously picks up. Pretty simple to recognize that. Now, let me just point out one thing. I just mentioned the wind speed of a tornado between 65 to 200, and that's inside the storm. So recognize that, ladies and gentlemen. Now, we're not talking about how fast a tornado moves. We're talking about the wind inside, the speed of the storm. In other words, how fast it will move from point A to point B can range from 30 to 70 miles an hour. So my question is, what do you think the fastest person can run? What's the speed someone can sprint? Well, athletes, they can probably get up to close to 20 miles per hour. And you're talking about fantastic in shape athletes, maybe 20 miles per hour. And obviously you'd have to run very, very fast for very long periods of time. Well, what I'm trying to point out here, folks, you can't outrun a tornado, so don't try. So warning signs, obviously, if you're wondering, gee, how do I know if a tornado is occurring? Well, there'll be either watches or warnings. Warnings are, or I say, warnings are going to be worse than watches. Obviously, if you see any of these characteristics, dark colored skies, a low lying cloud, hail is another important aspect of possible thunderstorms. And obviously, they make a lot of noise. So keep that in mind. So you're wondering, what should I do if a tornado is bearing down on me? And obviously, you can't outrun one. You don't want to run away from one. What you want to try and do is get to the lowest point in your home, hopefully in the basement, obviously into an interior room where there's no windows, maybe underneath the framing of a set of steps. You want to try and get to the lowest point, middle of the interior of your homes. That's probably the best thing you can do if, in fact, you're ever caught in one of these twisters. So, folks, hopefully this has given you a good insight of twisters. What I also want to point out, we want to recognize the things you need to get accomplished. Make sure you watch the video in the YouTube video much more in detail, and obviously the tornado form. So as always, Mr. Farinelli saying all the best.